It is Monday, November 20th, and you are tuned into W3 Radio with your three super hosts. I'm Michael Schofield.
I'm Dave Gillespie. Oh, no. Where's Dan?
Where's Dan? Dan. I see him.
I don't hear him anymore. Yeah. He's not muted.
This is good. This is good podcasting right here.
I think, yeah. Take two.
No way. We're keeping this all in.
When you want the taste of a truly great beer.
Hello, Dan. How was your day? Oh, it was good.
Uh-oh. All right.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
There you are.
Welcome.
I had to exit and rejoin.
Crazy.
Hmm.
What browser do you happen to be using?
Chrome. It's probably this shitty RTC stuff.
I was kind of hoping for a segue because in release news, big news, big positive news. I think it's cool. Firefox Quantum that we've talked about a little bit in the past has finally dropped. It doesn't seem to work with Google. That's why I brought it up.
It's cute logo. I mean, I'm a fan.
I haven't seen the logo yet. Hold on. Let me look
I
this
like
up.
the updates. It's brighter. It's nice. It's I actually tried to use it. And our corporate
little tail.
Yeah, isn't it cute?
Yeah.
But yeah, I tried to use it because I'd said this in a previous podcast that Firefox was, I think when we were talking about Firebug dying, that I was a diehard Firefox user for a long time and then switched to Chrome and this comes out and I'm like, man, I'm ready to go back to being one of those Firefox guys. And then our corporate, network policies are having problems with a brand new browser. Surprise. So I can't use it. I've been using it at home a tiny bit just to see what it's like. And man, it is fast. They're not kidding.
Yeah, no, I try to give it a fair shake. So I've made it my default. It's been my default browser for, the last few days. And except for just this moment where I wasn't able to launch Google Hangouts on it. It's been great, man. I love it. So I've been having this issue with Chrome where, maybe I do have, 30 or 40 tabs open on it at a time.
Damn.
But it periodically just like crashes on me. And thankfully, I can reopen with all the windows, but there'll be times where, like, let's say I split off a tab onto a second screen. If it crashes, then I'm going to lose like the whole shebang. So it's kind of been bugging me a little bit. And I made the change. I will say though, in some of the, chat rooms I sit in, like some people were pissed because Quantum doesn't support their favorite add-ons.
That's what I was wondering. Like, how does it work with things like React DevTools now? Like, are those up and running for it yet?
Good question. So I've got Vue DevTools on there, and it seems to be working okay. I'll tell you what though, my 1Password browser extension doesn't work on there. So I can't
really.
Yeah.
Which one are you using?
I like 1Password the product.
I see. Okay, I gotcha.
LastPass works.
Okay, good. I use LastPass. I don't care about the other one. That doesn't affect me, so I don't care.
But yeah, no, I'm excited about this. I think the performance stuff is kind of the big thing that they're pushing with this, and I assume add-on support will get better quickly.
Have you tried the grid? The grid tools on it yet?
Oh,
I have, man.
Yeah, I was gonna be like, have you guys gone into like the dev tools and like fooled around?
Yeah, there's some cool stuff going on, especially that grid tool for visualizing grids that you've created in CSS is amazing, and I mean that's been around. I've been playing with that a bit in the what do they call their pre-release? I don't know, but the
Nightly or whatever.
Nightly, yeah. The developer version updated to Quantum like a couple weeks ago.
It
maybe.
Sure did.
And so I've been kind of playing with that a bit too.
Yeah.
So this isn't exactly like the freshest thing, but other than that, everyone gets this now instead of just kind of insiders and power users. So I'm excited. Looks like they used a lot of Rust to do some of these improvements? I don't know if you guys have.
So that's the entire reason why they built Rust. So Rust was created by the Mozilla guys, and as far as I know, like the reason they built it was to build web browsers.
What's a good TLDR on Rust?
So Rust, in kind of like a programming paradigm, is probably like most similar to like C++ or C. So you write your code and you compile it. So it's compiled code, and it's like lower to the metal than something that's interpreted like Python or PHP or even like .NET stuff. Or Golang is kind of similar to these things except for Go has a runtime. But yeah, they're compiled, they're faster, and they're made to do things quickly. And they basically wrote as a replacement for C++ because C++ when it compiles it's kind of a nightmare to debug. And they wanted to kind of have a fresh slate, which is interestingly similar to what Google did with Go. They wanted a replacement for C and C++, so they wrote Golang. Right. So Go and Rust are kind of like, they've been around for, like 4 or 5 years, but in programming world, they're like new kids on the block. Sure. And Go is getting like really popular with web developers. Rust is getting popular with, sysadmins and that kind of stuff. So that's interesting. So if you like looking at new programming languages, those are fun to check out.
I was going to mention that, the release of Quantum sort of heralded a whole treasure of developer like posts and, articles, especially about like, the architecture of Quantum and things like that and how to eke out, performance and stuff. And it's been really good content. So
I haven't got a chance to try it out because we're basically wrapping up a massive project at work. Kind of happens here at around this time for like big marketing campaigns. So we always like pushing some crazy stuff ahead of like Q1. So when things settle down, I really want to like dig into it because I haven't given Firefox a fair shake in like 5 years.
Same.
I basically only load it when I'm testing something to make sure it works in Firefox.
Gents, we need a segue to the next topic.
We need a segue to be a segue?
Yeah, we need a segue to lead into a segue about, I don't want to like bury the lead. I don't want to say what it is on the air.
I don't know what we're talking about. Well, let's cut it out.
We don't cut out. We're a professional podcast.
We all know that's not true.
But if we were to edit the podcast, we might do it with the latest version of Visual Studio Code, which has introduced a real-time collaborative development with Live Share.
I think I said in a previous episode that everyone's talking about Visual Studio Code and everybody's switching to it and loves it, and I can't. I've tried a couple times to just switch, and it's not even like good reasons. It's just there's things I don't like about how it looks, and I'm like and then I just go like I got work to do. I'm going back to that. So I really, really want to give it a fairer shake than that. But that's been my experience so far. But I mean, this feature for a lot of people, I think, is going to be a huge selling point for switching over from something else, especially for people who are remote and on remote teams or an individual remote person working with other people collaboratively.
So here's my problem with VS Code. I used it for a few weeks and it was fine. But all of the reasons that I hear people getting excited to switch to VS Code, they're all features that are like already existing in IDEs, right? So VS Code is a text editor that has started to add IDE features, and then I hear folks on Twitter talking about like, oh my gosh, this feature is amazing. Well, that feature that you've wanted has existed in WebStorm for like 4 years.
Thank you. That was my specific example. So the last few days, I've been I was given marching orders to rapidly level up as an Angular developer, basically go from 0 to pro.
Who got you on that dying train?
The company that I work for, Dan.
Oh, okay. Have you told them about how great components are?
Dan,
how we like how we like view and react.
I took Todd Motto's Ultimate Angular course, and it's really good. Plug for like his teaching style. It's very positive. Anyway, so he and a lot of the Angular tutorials you run around are really kind of talking highly about, oh, you should use VS Code with Angular and TypeScript because reasons. And here I am just doing it in a PHP storm, and I'm like, oh, great. In a weird turn of a turn of the tables, I ended up in kind of a user testing pool for an earlier version of VS Code a couple years ago. And so I'd been playing with it as a user tester for a little bit. My experience there was positive. Once you get your settings right and just how you like it, changing from one editor to another is a real like bust,
Yeah, that's been one of my big problems. But I think it's not wrong that what you're saying about those, these IDEs having these features for years. I think the thing that's kind of missing from that is that isn't necessarily the target audience for something like VS Code, at least initially. It's people who, like me, who use TextMate, and then we use Sublime, and then we used Atom, and now these are all text editors that have some IDE features. VS Code is a natural, like, it's the cool thing in that same space. So for people who are already using editors that have all these features, it probably doesn't make any sense. But
Sure, but folks are getting excited about the features, so it's probably more so those folks should have given a proper IDE, a good test. Because if you're excited about those features, you could have had them years ago. Now, specifically, this new feature was like the live code.
Yeah,
the live code share or whatever it is. That's pretty cool, and I haven't heard of that yet.
Well, it may have to do with how the difference between how these things are built, right? Like, am I mistaken that VS Code is like this HTML?
It's an Electron app.
Okay, yeah. So
it's HTML, CSS, and Node.
Yeah. So I was wondering So I work remote. So this collaborative coding feature, it's really cool. My first question is like, well, is this going to come into WebStorm or something like that? And I would guess that the answer is probably, but maybe there's some like technical limitations to that. My other question is, these collaborative like design and development tools are cool. Like there's one I use called Mural, which Mural is just essentially a digital whiteboard on steroids. And, you can all jump in and click and drag sticky notes around. We've all had experiences with Google Docs and things like that. For as cool as the collab features are, I don't really have like a real use case like for them. I don't do this kind of like collaborative design or development,
like pair programming
often. So
it might be useful for teams who are doing full pair programming, but I imagine they already have tools in place. One thing that I would be concerned about would be the security around like sharing like this. So I don't know how it works under the hood.
Yeah, how does
that would be something that I would dig into.
Yeah, how's the connection actually happen?
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah,
because at that point you're sharing code.
Yeah, you're right.
Clearly, we keep all of our code like on private GitHub Enterprise servers, right? So if it's not like a hosted solution, our company would kind of be like, I don't know about this like peer-to-peer connection with our code because it opens you up to like man-in-the-middle attacks.
Sure.
I don't know if that's a thing or not. That's just one thing that I would look at if I were to research this.
Yeah, I'm not sure because the way that it sounds like this is working is that you're still working in the same files in the same code base. You have to be like able to access that stuff. I mean, this is no different. The part about that all of a sudden they have your code would be the same as if you're using a screen sharing tool to just show someone what you're doing. I mean,
yeah, basically.
So from that standpoint, I would assume if it's got the same kind of features as that, then it's fine. But yeah, this seems like kind of interesting because you're still just using your version of VS Code and your settings and the way that you have it set up, your color scheme, your whatever. You can just see, a team member's cursor in the same file with you. doing the same stuff, editing stuff together, where you can, be on the phone or in a conference or something like that and be working on the same file at the same time, which could get I wonder how that works. Like, can you both type and stuff at the same time? I assume so.
Well, that's basically how pair
interesting.
programming would go in real life, right? If you had
Sure.
a pair programming station, each developer would have like a keyboard on the computer, right? Or how
Right.
Google Drive works. But for something on like Google Docs, like if we're editing the same Word document, that's because Google Docs has that data, and we're just modifying it at the same time. So where does the data live for the VS Code live feature? Is it like client server where you start a connection and somebody is acting as the client and somebody else is the server? Do you guys know? Have you guys tried it yet?
No, that's stuff that I'm not sure about. It sounds like it's available in limited private preview, so it might not actually be officially released. They just had a Visual Studio. It was like a live event of some kind.
Yeah, that's what
where they announced this. So it does look like it's still in private preview. So I don't know. Maybe we should try to get involved in that and see how it works.
I guess like the thing at the back of my head is like, is this something that like lives, like, do you have to have your code living in something like, Visual Studio Online with like TFS? Because that's
I
my
doubt it.
I doubt it, but that's like my gut feeling. Like, oh god, they're just trying to sell us more TFS stuff.
That kind of brings up a point that I've kind of heard some of the reaction to this on Twitter. It's interesting that you make that point, because some of that reaction has been this kind of reconciling with the fact that Microsoft, how they've changed so much over the years. And a sentiment I keep hearing is that Microsoft is meeting developers where they are rather than trying to force specific tools on them. And that was kind of evidenced by the fact that in that live event, they were using Slack, right? And they were using like GitHub and Slack and things like that, which are not Microsoft has competing products to those, and yet they were using them. And one of the people, or both of the people that were presenting on it, were using Macs. It was like, this is a different company that isn't just trying to push TFS on us anymore. They're saying, whatever, as a developer, whatever you're comfortable with, wherever you are, we want our tools and our products to be able to work for you so that you have a better experience. That seems like their new kind of mantra that they're operating under.
Okay, so I just went into their FAQ and I actually found something about this.
That's where I am.
It says, live share only requirement is that the person sharing and their teammate each have internet access. Secure communication between team members during a live share session is facilitated by an Azure relay. Your workspace, i.e. source files, is not stored in the cloud. No special peer-to-peer connection is required, though one might be used to reduce latency. So it sounds like they just set up a client server application where they have the client the server basically running on Azure, and you both just pipe into it and it just syncs the things between you. So I assume one person starts it up, invites somebody else, and then it starts the sync, and then when you close, the sync kind of dissipates. But it sounds like you can also set up like peer-to-peer if you want to reduce latency. So that's pretty cool. Kind of like Dave said, like I've learned not to trust Microsoft because of, I'm in the enterprise world and I see kind of like how it looks from, like our C# developers, and it's kind of hairy, but what they're doing for developers in the wild seem to be a lot less, enterprisey.
The last word on that will be to answer the actual release question. Quote, we are working to bring the initial live share capabilities to a private preview as soon as we can, as in first quarter of the calendar year 2018. But that's just the start. So after that preview, there's no specific time when this will come out publicly.
My last question would be, does something like this already exist in Visual Studio? Do you guys know?
I've never heard that, but yeah.
Or is this a feature that they're bringing to Visual Studio Code before Visual Studio or at the same time? And if that's true, that would be an interesting case of Microsoft elevating VS Code maybe above like their flagship editor for their, proprietary languages.
GitHub introduced security alerts on GitHub earlier this week, and quote, last month we made it easier for you to keep track of the projects your code depends on with the dependency graph. Today, we're helping you do more than see those important projects. With our dependency graph enabled, we'll notify you when we detect a vulnerability in one of your dependencies and suggest known fixes from the GitHub community. With the release, they posted like a whole bunch of like a nice GIF and some stuff. Have you guys seen this and or like even enabled it on your own?
No, so I haven't done it yet. I wonder how they're collecting that data. So I can't remember the name of the tool. I wish I could so I could plug it. But I went to the Node JS North America conference a couple of years ago, and this company was selling this tool that basically would analyze your npm package.json, and it would look at all of your packages, and then it would look for known vulnerabilities in that code. So some were like user reported, some were like, through static analysis of the code. And then you would get this report of like all of these errors and what you can do to mitigate them. Because that's one of the easiest ways to introduce vulnerabilities in your code is you find a package that does what you want. It has a vulnerability. You didn't vet it out enough, and now you have that vulnerability in your code. So it's interesting that now this is about a year and a half later. It seems like GitHub is kind of doing that same thing. So it's just interesting to see how security-minded things are starting to become, especially around things like NPM, because NPM is a shit show for poorly written code.
Quote, GitHub tracks public vulnerabilities in Ruby gems and NPM packages on MITRE's common vulnerabilities and exposure list. So anything that basically has a vulnerability that's been disclosed that has a CVE ID in the National Vulnerability Database is going to kind of like populate this data. Let's see. When GitHub receives a notification of a newly announced vulnerability, we identify public repos and private repos that have opted into vulnerability detection that use the affected version of that dependency. Then we send security alerts to owners and people with admin access to those affected repos. We detect vulnerable dependencies in public repositories by default. Owners of and people with admin access to private repos can also opt in. So it seems like that's certainly what they're doing with like the NPM stuff, and
yeah, so that's awesome.
You have to opt into like the dependency tracker, which I haven't done either.
It says public repositories are automatically already have the dependency graph.
I should check one of the public repos that I'm on and just see. Yeah, I guess all of ours are private, so.
Well, let's jump in and look at something like Express, right? Where's this dependency graph button? It's one of the things that GitHub is I can never figure out where is it in Insights?
Insights, yep. And then on the left,
dependency graph. All right, so I opened this up and it says dependencies defined in package.json. There's 48 of them. And then it has links to all of their repos. That's pretty cool. What version they are fixed at. And then there's there's a list of dependents on Express.js, which is about 1.2 million repositories depend on Express.
Wow, that's really useful to know. Like,
I haven't looked at this before. This is kind of cool.
This is dope,
yeah. So I guess anybody who depends on Express, if any of its dependents were to have an error and you have this feature flipped on, then you would be notified.
Look at this. If you toggle the chevron next to the dependencies, it shows the sub-dependencies as well. So
ooh, nice.
So it just becomes kind of like exponentially dependent on shit. This is really cool. I'm a fan. Fun. I wonder if they have.
Yeah, this is really cool.
I guess they don't have the. We wouldn't see the security thing because we're not admins. Or
I don't think they. I can't tell, but from the UI, it doesn't look like they point out whether any of these things have or dependencies with vulnerabilities or not. So I was kind of expecting that this dependency graph to have an alert. Maybe it does, and maybe I don't have a good example here, to alert me that, like, hey, maybe this has a vulnerability. Maybe you don't want to use it.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I would be hoping for. Like when I go to use it, before I decide on it, I could be notified. Maybe I need to just do my own research and to make sure I'm not pulling in.
No, that's not how we build websites. Twitter says it will judge verified users' offline behavior. That this one coming from The Verge, and we're bringing this up because we talked about this in the previous episode.
I missed out because of my internet. So kind of where we're give me a quick summary.
Yeah.
Oh, so basically,
this was specifically.
Oh, go for it.
Sure. Yeah. It's specifically about the badges, the verification badges, and how one of the organizer of the big Charlottesville, neo-Nazi rally or white supremacist rally, whatever you want to call it, got verified a couple weeks ago on Twitter, and it caused, an uproar about what does this even mean? What is verification if people with this kind of behavior can be verified? And Twitter's response was essentially to turn off the entire system until they figured out what to do. And so this seems like a follow-up, essentially, that they're going to start doing, looking into people's behavior off of Twitter and deciding if they should verify. And it says that as the company stripped the blue check mark from a handful of accounts associated with the far right as kind of part of the announcement. So they've already started taking away verification. So it's an interesting follow-up that they moved fairly quickly on this one compared to how they've been on a lot of these other issues.
Well, that verification thing, really, was just another nail in that coffin about just how the lack of transparency and what the verification process even is. The big complaints were especially coming from women of clout who demonstrated that verification has little to do with meritocracy or even number of followers, but seems to be arbitrarily made decisions. The key phrase, this is a quote from The Verge, in Twitter's updated policy is this one. It's just one sentence, guys. It's just, quote, reasons for removal may reflect behaviors on and off. So what that actually means, again, is, I guess, up to interpretation. Many questions remain unanswered. This is another quote. What will the company's review consist of? How will it examine users' offline behavior? Will it simply respond to reports, or will it actively look for violations? That's an interesting question. Will it handle the work with its existing team, or will it expand its trust and safety team to a greater number of people? And the company, of course, declined to comment.
So this makes sense to me. So the gist is, let me get this right, is that folks were seeing that verified badge kind of as an endorsement of that person from Twitter. Is that about right?
Verification has social clout on Twitter.
Essentially, the reason why they added that was because there's a bunch of celebrity accounts, not from the person themselves.
Yeah, totally.
And so by having that, it's like, oh, this is a real person, and they get this check mark because they're popular enough to deserve it, right? Yeah. That makes sense.
It was always, according to Twitter, this user is important enough to receive this check mark. And because it did start with celebrities, and then you'd start seeing, celebrities within smaller communities, people in the development world or the design world or different things like that aren't traditional celebrities, but that are well known, and the fact that they never had an open process for how that check mark was awarded. It's very easy for people to see it in whatever way, to see it as an endorsement, to see it in a lot of different ways that Twitter has no control over if they're not going to tell us exactly what the qualifications are for receiving that check mark. So
Sure. So, but now with this decision that they can revoke it is just confirming that it's an endorsement from Twitter, because they have the ability to give it based on, I mean, we can see the information that they ask for in a request. They ask for like a phone number and profile photo, a header photo, all this jazz, your birthday, your website. And then they can decide to award it to you. We don't know what that process looked like, but now they're just openly saying like, okay, we can choose to revoke it, which doesn't mean that we didn't officially verify your identity, but we want to take away that clout from you having that. So they're just kind of like confirming that that kind of, bullshit process.
Yeah.
Neat.
Google yesterday announced a forthcoming update to its accelerated mobile pages, or AMP, web format that aims to discourage website owners from misusing the service. Some site owners would publish two versions of a web page, a standard page and an AMP specific one that acts as a teaser of sorts that directs the users to the original. So Google is just going to crack down on that.
Yeah, it's a common. The whole point of AMP was supposed to be web pages are slow. We're gonna introduce this weird, subset of HTML that we verify if you're following our rules, and for how advertising can work, how JavaScript is allowed, how different things actually, things that affect performance, how you can do it so that it loads quickly. And the point was supposed to be that this was a representation of the same page, that there were two pages. There's the AMP version and the regular version, and they were essentially the same thing, but there was no restriction to what the actual content of an AMP page is. So people were, I'm not sure that I've ever necessarily come across this, but it's clearly a big enough problem if Google's stepping in to say, we're going to start reviewing this in some way. I'm assuming it's all going to be, machine learning and AI that's going to decide if the two pages are the same and not people going through and checking, but they're going to step in with some sort of process that double checks that. I think that's a good thing.
One of the original controversies with AMP was that for sites that rely on ads to, pay their bills, the AMP, kind of like built-in ad blockers or etc., would dramatically reduce the number of ads and the kinds of ads that you could put on that content. It's been a while since I followed, but I think there was a point where maybe it was only like double-click ads, which are like AdSense ads. Google Search is going to prioritize AMP-conforming pages in its search results. Google also controls the main ad delivery system. So if you were a site that chose not to conform, you were going to be less searchable and thus have fewer eyes on those ads, and you would hurt your bank account. And if you did conform, it would still hurt your bank account because you're restricted on the kind of ads that you can put on there. And, a lot of this is for good reason. It's good user experience reasons, because these ads were exploiting users. I empathize. I think this is probably a good thing for folks who like AMP. It doesn't mitigate that controversy.
I see them all the time. I mean, anytime you search, it's all the top results are always have a little tag on it that says AMP. And one of the big things is they have that search carousel up at the top, like very top of the results. And in order to get into that carousel, which has a picture and a little blurb, it's nice. You have to use AMP to get into that. So while they say AMP doesn't affect search ranking, it does, because if you're not using AMP, you're not getting in the carousel, which is at the very top. It has visual prominence and it drives a lot of traffic. So having AMP is a requirement essentially to be in the best section of the Google results page. That's my biggest problem with AMP in general. I think this is a good thing that they're doing to stop some of the bad stuff people are doing, but it doesn't even come close to touching the kind of ethical problems that I have with AMP's existence.
You're right. Yeah, I think I misspoke. Yeah, they're not prioritizing. They're prioritizing well-performing websites, but they're not specifically prioritizing AMP, except for
Right.
like in these carousels on mobile search. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As usual, we can be found at w3radio.com. Lots of interesting subscription options. Maybe not so interesting. The regular subscription options. All of our past episodes, as well as means to contact us. We are still investigating, like including transcripts with our episodes. More on that later. And yeah, guys, how can the internet get in touch with you?
I'm at Yoda SW16 on Twitter and under that username everywhere else.
Yeah, and I'm at Daniel G. Sims on Twitter and GitHub.
And that's it for this week in web design news. See you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.